She called me sinful for not wearing white. The words dripped from her pearl-adorned throat like poison blessed by Sunday prayer. Diane Morrison, my future mother-in-law, the woman who led Bible studies and judged everyone's souls, decided mine was stained. She wanted me erased, whitewashed, made acceptable. But I am Riley Harper, and I do not erase myself for anyone. I wore green at my wedding, neon green, brilliant, impossible to ignore green. And when I revealed her sin in front of God and everyone, her white facade shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. Some women wear white. I wore the truth, subscribed to witness the revenge that exposed a hypocrite. I should have known from the first Sunday dinner that Diane Morrison would become my war. She opened the door of her Waco home wearing a cream cardigan set that probably cost more than my rent, pearls clicking against her collarbone like rosary beads of judgment. Her smile was warm in that practiced way that churchwomen perfect, the kind that reaches the lips, but never quite touches the eyes. Caleb squeezed my hand as we stepped inside, his palm slightly sweaty, and I realized this man I loved was nervous. Nervous for me to meet his mother. Nervous that the two women in his life might collide rather than connect. I wore a simple floral dress, my watercolor tattoo peeking from beneath the sleeve, my rose-tinted hair pulled into a casual bun. I thought I looked sweet, approachable, like someone you could love if you gave them a chance. Diane gave me no chance. Her eyes traveled from my pink hair to my exposed tattoo, to my vintage boots in one calculated sweep that lasted 3 seconds, but communicated an entire thesis. I was wrong. Wrong aesthetic, wrong style, wrong energy, wrong existence for her son. She recovered quickly, that practiced smile snapping back into place like a mask secured with decades of Southern politeness. "Riley, how lovely to finally meet you," she said, and the word lovely landed like an insult wrapped in silk. We sat around a dining table that looked like a museum display, with embroidered placemats and china so delicate I was terrified to touch it. Thomas, Caleb's father, was kind in that quiet way of men who have learned not to make waves. He asked about my graphic design work with genuine interest, while Diane served pot roast with the mechanical precision of someone performing a duty rather than sharing a meal. The interrogation began during dessert. Diane set down a slice of chess pie in front of me and asked, with that same pleasant smile, where my family attended church. I explained that my parents were more spiritual than religious, that I grew up in Austin, where people expressed faith in different ways. Her fork paused midair. "Different ways," she repeated, as if I had just confessed to worshiping in a coven. "Well, faith is rather important to our family, Riley. Caleb was raised in the church. He was baptized here at First Baptist when he was 12. We believe in structure, tradition, values. The unsaid hung in the air like smoke. You do not have these things. You are a threat to what we built." I smiled and said I respected that, which was true. What I did not say was that I also respected my own path, and no amount of chess pie would make me apologize for it. The drive back to Austin that night was quiet. Caleb finally spoke when we crossed the city limits, his voice careful. "She just needs time to get to know you." I looked at him, this man I loved so completely, and saw the little boy who grew up trying to make his mother proud. I reached over and squeezed his knee. "It's okay," I told him, meaning it. I understood complicated families. What I did not understand yet was that Diane Morrison did not want time to know me. She wanted me gone, erased, replaced with someone she could mold into her image of acceptable. Someone who wore cardigans and pearls. Someone who colored inside every line she drew. Someone who was not me. That Sunday dinner was not a welcome. It was a declaration of war, polite and perfumed, but war nonetheless. The engagement ring on my finger caught the streetlights as we drove. A simple, emerald-cut diamond that Caleb had saved for months to buy. He proposed at Zilker Park during the Trail of Lights, dropped to one knee in front of a tunnel of glowing trees, while strangers cheered. It was perfect. It was us. But now, heading home with the weight of Diane's judgment still pressing on my chest, I wondered if perfect would be enough, if love could survive a woman determined to destroy it. I pressed my cheek against the cold window and watched Texas blur past, not knowing that in 9 months, I would stand in front of that woman wearing a dress the color of radioactive truth, not knowing that her secrets were darker than anything she accused me of, not knowing that the war she started would end with her complete and total destruction. Subscribe to see how judgment becomes justice. The wedding planning began 3 months after that first dinner, and Diane inserted herself into every decision like a splinter working its way deeper beneath skin. Caleb and I chose Fredericksburg as our location, a compromise town between Austin's creative chaos and Waco's conservative restraint, with rolling hills and German heritage buildings that felt romantic and neutral. We found the Hoffman House, a historic venue with exposed limestone walls and oak trees that had witnessed a century of celebrations. I fell in love with it immediately, could already picture string lights and wildflowers and dancing under stars. Diane called it rustic, the word dripping with disdain. Rustic means unrefined, Riley. Is that really the impression you want to give? I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper. The invitations were next. I designed them myself because that is what I do, what I love, what I am good at. Modern calligraphy with watercolor accents in sage and blush, printed on thick cotton paper that felt like luxury in your hands. I was proud of them, proud of the artistry and thought I poured into each detail. Diane held one between 2 fingers like it might contaminate her. Very modern, she said. Modern pronounced like sin. Most of our church family prefers traditional invitations. Something with a cross, perhaps? Scripture? I explained gently that we wanted the invitations to reflect both of us. Our style. Our love. She smiled that smile again. Of course, dear. It is your wedding. I just worry what people will think. People. Always people. The invisible jury of her church friends who apparently had nothing better to do than judge paper stock. Music became the next battlefield. Caleb and I wanted a mix. Some traditional ceremony songs, but also live music at the reception. A local Austin band that played folk and indie covers that made you want to dance and cry simultaneously. Diane presented us with a list of appropriate songs. All hymns. All from her church's approved repertoire. Secular music at a wedding just feels wrong, Caleb, she said, directing this at her son because she knew he was the weak point in our united front. This is a sacred covenant you're entering. Shouldn't the music reflect that? Caleb looked at me helplessly, caught between the woman who raised him and the woman he chose. I took his hand. We appreciate your input, Diane, but we've already booked the band. Her smile never wavered, but her eyes went cold as communion wine left too long in the chalice. Then came the dress conversation, and this is where politeness died. We were having lunch at a cafe in Waco, one of those awkward monthly meetings Caleb insisted on to keep peace. I mentioned that I had an appointment at Unbridled in Austin, a boutique known for non-traditional wedding gowns, because I was considering something different. Maybe champagne with gold embroidery, maybe blush pink with French lace, something that felt like me. Diane set down her fork with enough force to make the table shake. Wedding dresses are white, Riley. Her voice was no longer polite. That is tradition. That is how it has always been done. White symbolizes purity, virtue, entering marriage with a clean slate. I started to explain the history, how white wedding dresses only became tradition with Queen Victoria in 1840, but she cut me off. You are already tattooed, she said, the word tattooed landing like an accusation of felony. You have pink hair. You dress like someone from one of those music festivals. The least you could do, Riley, the very least, is wear a proper white dress and look like a decent bride. Decent. That word hit differently than all the others. Decent implied I was currently indecent, improper, shameful. Heat flooded my face. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not for her. Caleb finally found his voice. Mom, that's enough. But Diane was not finished. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to that sweet poison register. I'm just trying to help, sweetheart. I know you love her, but someone needs to guide her. She does not understand our world, our values. I'm trying to save you both from embarrassment. The drive home was silent except for my crying, the kind of angry tears that make you hate yourself for giving someone that power. Caleb pulled over at a rest stop and held me while I shook. She had no right to say that. He whispered into my hair. You are beautiful and perfect, and I don't care what color dress you wear. I believed him. I did. But his mother's words had burrowed deep, had found the soft, vulnerable place where doubt lives. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe love meant compromise, even when compromise felt like erasure. I cried harder, and Caleb held tighter, and neither of us knew that Diane's cruelty had just planted the seed of her own destruction. Subscribed to witness the moment judgment became a weapon. 3 months before the wedding, I drove to Waco to pick up some family photos from Thomas. Caleb was at a software conference in Dallas, so I went alone, planning to make it quick. I stopped at Common Grounds, a coffee shop near the Morrison house, needing caffeine and a moment to prepare myself for even a brief encounter with Diane's world. The cafe was busy with the lunch crowd, students from Baylor University mixing with church ladies on break from volunteer work. I ordered a lavender latte and found a table near the window, scrolling through wedding vendor emails on my phone. Florists, photographers, caterers, all the moving pieces of a celebration that felt increasingly tainted by one woman's disapproval. That is when I saw her, Diane Morrison. But not the Diane I knew, not the cardigan-wearing church leader with her practiced smile and judgment. This Diane was tucked into a corner booth in the back of the cafe, partially hidden by a decorative screen, and she was holding hands with a man. Not Thomas. I knew Thomas Morrison, knew his quiet accountant energy and gentle gray hair. This man was younger, maybe early 40s, with sandy blonde hair styled with too much product and a tattoo visible on his forearm. A tattoo. The irony almost made me laugh out loud. Diane, who had shamed me for my watercolor ink, was holding hands with a tattooed man in a dark corner of a coffee shop. They were leaning close, intimate, their body language screaming affair. My heart hammered against my ribs. Part of me wanted to march over there, to confront her, to ask how she dared judge me while she was clearly betraying her husband. But something deeper, something strategic, told me to wait, to watch, to document. I angled my phone carefully, pretending to take a selfie but actually capturing them in the background. The photo was not perfect, but it was clear enough. Diane's face. The man's face. Their intertwined hands on the table. They stayed for another 20 minutes, talking in whispers, and I stayed too, hidden behind my laptop screen, my coffee growing cold. When they finally stood to leave, I ducked lower, watching through the window as they walked to the parking lot. They paused by a silver truck. He touched her face. She smiled up at him in a way I had never seen her smile, genuine and young and completely unguarded. After they drove away in separate vehicles, I sat in my car, shaking, not from fear or sadness, but from something darker. Vindication, rage, the kind of clarity that comes when the universe hands you a weapon and whispers, "Use this." I drove to Thomas's house in a daze, collected the photos, made small talk about the wedding while my mind spun. Thomas was kind, asked if I was feeling all right, noticed I seemed distracted. I lied and said I was just stressed about planning. He patted my shoulder with fatherly affection, this decent man who had no idea his wife was betraying him. Guilt flickered in my chest, but I pushed it down. This was not my sin to carry. This was Diane's. That night, I did not tell Caleb. Not yet. I needed more than one chance sighting, more than one blurry photo. I needed undeniable proof, the kind that could not be explained away or dismissed. I spent hours researching the man from the cafe, using the partial shot of his face to search social media. It took me until midnight, but I found him. Jake Sullivan, leader of worship at First Baptist Church of Waco, the same church where Diane led the women's prayer group, the same church where she performed her righteousness every Sunday. Jake was married, had been for 17 years. His Facebook was full of family photos, 2 children, a wife named Sarah, who taught elementary school. His bio said he was passionate about serving God through music. The hypocrisy was so thick I could choke on it. I created a plan. I would follow them, document their meetings, gather evidence until there was no room for denial. Some might call it stalking. I called it justice. For 2 weeks, I became a shadow. I tracked Diane's patterns, learned that she met Jake every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, always at places outside of Waco where they were less likely to be recognized. A park in McGregor, a restaurant in Temple. Once I followed them to an apartment complex and watched Diane enter a unit while Jake waited in his truck before following her inside. I photographed everything, time-stamped and saved. And then, I executed the riskiest part of my plan. I created a fake Facebook profile, posed as a representative from a Christian music label interested in Jake's worship albums. He accepted the friend request within hours, vain and hungry for recognition. Through careful manipulation, I got him talking, got him sharing screenshots of his conversations. including ones with Diane. Explicit, romantic, damning. Subscribe to see how evidence becomes ammunition. I showed Caleb everything on a Sunday morning in our Austin apartment, spreading the evidence across our kitchen table like a prosecutor presenting a case. Photos of his mother and Jake Sullivan in the cafe, at the park, entering that apartment. Screenshots of their messages, the kind that made my face burn even though I was not the one who wrote them. "Your wife is lucky she doesn't know what a real man feels like," Jake had written to Diane. Her response: "Tommy hasn't touched me in years. I feel alive again with you." There were dozens more, each one worse than the last, each one dripping with betrayal and self-justification. Caleb stared at the evidence for a long time without speaking, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to name. Denial, anger, disgust, grief. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were red but dry, shock keeping the tears at bay. "My whole life," he said, his voice hollow and strange. "My whole life she told me how to live. What was right and wrong? What was moral? What was sin?" He picked up one of the photos, the one where his mother was smiling at Jake in a way Caleb had probably never seen her smile at his father. "She judged you for your hair, your tattoos, your dress, for being yourself. And she was doing this." The word "this" landed heavy with revulsion. I reached across the table and took his hand, feeling the tremor in his fingers. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, meaning it despite the vindication burning in my chest. This was his mother. His world was crumbling. He squeezed my hand hard enough to hurt. "Don't apologize. You didn't do this." She did. We sat in silence for a while, the morning sun streaming through our window, lighting up the evidence of Diane Morrison's double life. Caleb wanted to confront her immediately, wanted to drive to Waco and explode her world the way she had tried to explode ours. I stopped him. "Wait," I said, my mind already racing ahead to something bigger, something that would not just expose her, but fundamentally alter the power she held over us. "I have an idea," I explained slowly, carefully, watching his face as he processed what I was suggesting. "Expose her at the wedding, in front of the church community that worshipped her, in front of her husband, in front of Jake Sullivan and his unsuspecting wife. Make her face her hypocrisy publicly, the same way she had tried to shame me publicly." Caleb was quiet for a long time, wrestling with the morality of public humiliation versus private confrontation. Finally, he nodded. "She's been cruel to you for months. She's been lying to my father for who knows how long. If we tell her privately, she'll manipulate the situation, make herself the victim. But if everyone sees the truth at once..." He trailed off, but I understood. Truth in sunlight cannot hide. That afternoon, I went to Unbridled in Austin, the boutique Diane had essentially forbidden me from visiting. The owner, a woman named Martina with silver hair and kind eyes, greeted me warmly. I told her I wanted something completely non-traditional, something bold, something that made a statement. She listened intently, not judging, just nodding and making notes. "What's your favorite color?" she asked. I hesitated, thinking of sage and blush, the soft colors I had been gravitating toward to appease everyone around me. Then I thought of Diane's face when I mentioned a non-white dress, the disgust and judgment. "Green?" I said suddenly, surprising myself. "Neon green, the brightest, most impossible to ignore green you can find." Martina's eyes lit up with the recognition of a creative challenge. She disappeared into the back and returned with fabric samples in shades of electric lime, radioactive mint, glowing emerald. We settled on a shade that practically vibrated with intensity, a neon green that would photograph like a supernatural glow. Martina sketched designs while I described what I wanted. Mermaid silhouette to show my curves, dramatic train for impact, open back because my body was mine to display how I chose, silver embroidery to catch light like stars against a night sky. "This will be stunning," Martina promised, her hands already working on measurements. "But honey, you'll be the only thing anyone can look at in photos. This color demands attention." I smiled, thinking of Diane's carefully planned aesthetic, her vision of a traditional church wedding with cream and ivory and respectable restraint. "Good," I said. "That's exactly what I want." We scheduled fittings for the next 2 months, and I left the boutique feeling powerful in a way I had not felt since this whole wedding nightmare began. I was taking control of my narrative, The next piece of my plan required professional help. I contacted Mason, a tech friend who did AV work for corporate events, and explained what I needed. A presentation during the wedding ceremony, triggered by remote control, displayed on whatever screen or projector the venue had. Mason listened to my request without judgment, which I appreciated because I knew how unhinged this might sound to someone outside the situation. "So, you want to expose your mother-in-law's affair during your actual wedding ceremony," he clarified, just to make sure he understood correctly. "In front of all the guests, including the guy she's sleeping with and both of their spouses." I nodded. Mason whistled low. "That's either the most brilliant or most insane revenge I've ever heard. Maybe both." He agreed to help, said he would create a simple slideshow that I could control from my phone, timed perfectly for maximum impact. "Just promise me I can be there to see it," he joked, but I could tell part of him was serious, subscribed to see the weapon being forged. The months before the wedding passed in a strange duality. On the surface, I played the role of busy bride, managing vendors and seating charts, and all the ordinary chaos of wedding planning. Underneath, I was orchestrating something darker, something that required precision and nerve I did not know I possessed. Diane continued her campaign of subtle sabotage, always with that smile, always with the excuse that she just wanted to help. She sent me articles about modest wedding attire. She forwarded links to hymns she thought were appropriate for the ceremony. Once, she mailed me a devotional book about biblical womanhood, with certain passages highlighted. "Wives, submit to your husbands. A woman should learn in quietness and full submission." I read the marked sections and laughed darkly, imagining her reading these passages in bed with Jake Sullivan, the worship leader who sang about purity while texting another man's wife. Caleb and I told Diane I had chosen a white dress, a deliberate lie to keep her unsuspecting. She was thrilled, praised me for finally seeing reason, for respecting tradition. "I'm so glad you came around, Riley," she said during one of our forced lunches, reaching across the table to pat my hand with false warmth. "You're going to look like a proper bride." I smiled back, my face a mask of agreement, while inside I counted down the days until she would see exactly what kind of bride I was. 70 days, 50 days, 30. The anticipation was delicious and terrifying in equal measure. I had nightmares sometimes about it backfiring, about somehow becoming the villain in my own story. But then I would remember her voice calling me indecent, her judgment of my body and my choices, and the resolve would return harder than before. The dress fittings were sacred time, just me and Martina in the boutique, no one else knowing what we were creating. The neon green fabric transformed under her expert hands into something spectacular. The mermaid silhouette hugged my body perfectly. The train fanned out behind me like a peacock's tail, and the silver embroidery caught light like lightning in a summer storm. When I tried on the completed dress for the first time, I cried. Not tears of doubt or fear, but tears of recognition. This was me. Entirely, unapologetically, me. Martina stood behind me as I stared at my reflection, her hands on my shoulders. "You're going to break the internet, honey," she said quietly. "But more importantly, you're going to break free." She understood without me explaining that this dress was not just about aesthetics. It was about reclaiming power from someone who had tried to take it. I coordinated with Mason on the technical details, sent him the photos and screenshots I had gathered, watched as he assembled them into a devastating slideshow. We tested it 3 times at the Hoffman house during our venue walkthrough, making sure the projector would work, that the images would display clearly, that nothing would glitch at the critical moment. The venue coordinator, a sweet woman named Patricia, assumed it was a romantic photo montage of Caleb and me. I let her believe that, smiled and nodded while my stomach twisted with anticipation. Mason pulled me aside after the final test. "Last chance to back out," he said, not judgmentally, just giving me an exit. "Once you do this, there's no taking it back. Everyone's going to know. It's going to be chaos." I looked at the projector screen, imagined Diane's face appearing on it, her secrets illuminated for everyone to see. "I know," I said. "That's the point." The guest list was another carefully orchestrated element. I made sure Jake Sullivan and his wife Sarah were invited, sent them a beautiful invitation with a personal note about how much it would mean to have their church family there. Jake accepted immediately, probably thinking it would be good optics to attend the wedding of the pastor's son. to support Diane's family publicly while destroying it privately. Sarah accepted too, her RSVP card filled out in neat teacher handwriting, excited to celebrate love. I felt a pang of guilt for what I was about to do to her, the innocent party in this mess, but then reminded myself that I was not the one who had deceived her. Jake was. Diane was. I was just the messenger. Thomas Morrison would be there, of course, walking his son down the aisle in the absence of traditional father-daughter dynamics, since my own father had passed years ago. He had no idea that his marriage was about to detonate in front of him. The week before the wedding, Diane hosted a small bridal tea at her house, a last-ditch effort to mold me into something acceptable. The church ladies were there, women with carefully styled hair and conservative dresses, all of them part of Diane's prayer group, all of them looking at me with varying degrees of curiosity and judgment. They asked polite questions about the wedding, about married life, about my plans for children. I answered politely, played the role of grateful bride, thankful for their wisdom. Diane sat at the head of the table like a queen holding court, basking in the attention, in the performance of being the perfect Christian mother welcoming her son's wife. I watched her smile and laugh and quote scripture, and I thought about the messages on her phone. I want you so badly I can barely sit through service without thinking about your hands on me. Her words to Jake, this woman, this hypocrite. In 5 days, everyone in this room would know exactly who Diane Morrison really was. Subscribe to watch the trap being set. September 15th arrived with cloudless blue sky and temperature perfect enough to feel like a blessing, the kind of day that made you believe in divine timing. I woke up in a hotel room in Fredericksburg surrounded by my bridesmaids, women who had known me since college, who loved me for exactly who I was. They knew about the dress, knew about the plan, and had sworn themselves to secrecy with the dedication of co-conspirators. My best friend Jenna handed me coffee and grinned. "Today's the day you become a legend," she said, and we all laughed with the slightly hysterical energy of people about to witness something either brilliant or catastrophic. I showered and let the hotel stylist work on my hair, loose waves that fell past my shoulders, my pink-tinted ends catching light. Makeup was dramatic but elegant, smoky eyes and nude lips, my watercolor tattoo visible and proud on my arm. I looked at myself in the mirror and felt powerful. The Hoffman house was transformed into something from a magazine, string lights wrapped around oak trees, wildflowers in mason jars, the limestone walls glowing in afternoon sun. Guests began arriving at 4, dressed in their church best, the women in modest dresses and the men in suits that probably only came out for weddings and funerals. I watched from a window in the bridal suite as Diane arrived, impeccable in a beige mother-of-the-groom dress with her signature pearls, Thomas beside her in a dark suit looking proud and nervous. Jake Sullivan arrived moments later with Sarah and their 2 children, the picture of a wholesome church family. Sarah wore a floral dress and kept smoothing her children's hair, clearly excited to be at such a beautiful wedding. My stomach clenched watching her, this kind woman who had no idea her world was about to shatter. But I reminded myself again, I was not the betrayer. I was just the revealer. Caleb and I had decided not to see each other before the ceremony, honoring that one tradition despite breaking so many others. But he texted me at 4:30. "I love you. Whatever happens today, I love you. Let's burn it all down together." I smiled and typed back, "See you at the altar. Bring matches." At 4:45, my bridesmaids lined up in their neutral beige and gold dresses, a deliberate choice so they would not clash with what was coming. They walked down the aisle to soft acoustic guitar, guests standing and smiling, everything appearing perfectly normal. Patricia, the venue coordinator, gave me the signal. The music shifted to a modern instrumental version of Can't Help Falling in Love, romantic and sweet. I took a breath, lifted my chin, and stepped into the doorway where everyone could see me. The reaction was instantaneous and electric. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. Heads turned, mouths opened, someone dropped their program. I walked down that aisle in my neon green dress, and it was like moving through water. Everything slow and surreal and hyper-real simultaneously. The dress glowed in the golden hour light, the silver embroidery catching every ray like I was wearing lightning. I was a forest fire, a northern light, an impossibility-made fabric. Diane's face went from smiling to confused, to absolutely white with rage in the space of 3 seconds. She started to stand, Thomas's hand on her arm pulling her back down. I heard her hiss loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "This is a disgrace. This is inappropriate. She's making a mockery of this sacred occasion." But I did not look at her. I looked at Caleb, standing at the altar in his dark gray suit, and he was crying with joy, his smile so wide it had to hurt. "You're so beautiful," he mouthed, and I believed him. The ceremony began normally enough. Reverend Matthews, a genuinely kind man in his 60s, who had baptized Caleb and married Diane and Thomas decades ago, welcomed everyone with warmth. He spoke about marriage as covenant, about love as choice, about the sacred bond being entered into. We went through the traditional elements, the readings and prayers, and I could feel the tension in the room, guests still processing my dress, Diane still radiating fury from the front row. Then came the moment for personal vows, and this was where my plan activated. I took the microphone from Reverend Matthews with a smile. "Before we begin our vows," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, "I want to take a moment to thank some very special people who made this day possible." I turned slightly to look at Diane, especially my mother-in-law, Diane Morrison, who taught me so much about the difference between appearance and truth. Mason, positioned near the back with the AV equipment, caught my subtle nod. The projector screen behind the altar, which guests probably assumed was for decoration, suddenly illuminated. The first image appeared, Diane and Jake Sullivan sitting in common grounds, hands intertwined on the table, leaning close in unmistakable intimacy. The church went silent, with the kind of silence that feels like vacuum, like all the air being sucked out of the room at once. I continued speaking, calm and clear. Diane spent months telling me I was inappropriate, that my tattoos were sinful, that my hair was wrong, that my dress needed to be white to symbolize purity and virtue. The second image appeared, Diane and Jake in the parking lot, his hand on her face, her looking up at him with naked affection. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Someone said, "Oh my God," loud enough to echo. The third image, a screenshot of a text message, Diane's name at the top. "Tommy is traveling until Tuesday. Come to my house tomorrow. I can't wait to feel you again. Subscribe to witness the moment truth explodes." Chaos erupted like a bomb detonating in slow motion. Diane shot to her feet, her face no longer white but purple with rage and humiliation, her carefully constructed mask obliterated in front of everyone she had spent years trying to impress. "This is a lie!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. "She's manipulating images. She's trying to destroy me because I wouldn't accept her." But the fourth image was already appearing on screen. Jake's response to Diane's text, complete with a shirtless photo of himself, and the message, "Your mouth is sin, Diane. I dream about it during worship." The church ladies in her prayer group gasped in perfect horror. Mrs. Henderson, who had led Bible study with Diane for 15 years, stood up and walked out, hand over her mouth. Others followed, a slow exodus of people who could not bear to witness the destruction of someone they had admired. Thomas Morrison, Diane's husband of 35 years, Caleb's gentle father, stood slowly from his seat. His face was not angry, but broken, the expression of a man watching his entire life revealed as a lie. "Diane," he said quietly, but the microphone system caught it, amplified it so everyone heard the devastation in his voice. "You've been with Jake, the worship leader? The boy is young enough to be your son." Diane spun toward him, tears streaming mascara down her cheeks, her pearls clicking frantically as her hands gestured wildly. "I can explain, Tommy, please. She's twisting this. She's making it look worse than it is." But Thomas was already moving, walking down the aisle away from her, his shoulders shaking. Caleb started to go after his father, but I caught his hand. "Let him go," I whispered. "Give him space." Caleb's face was wet with tears, but he nodded, trusting me. Jake Sullivan had frozen in his seat, deer in headlights, his carefully styled hair and tattooed arms suddenly looking ridiculous in this context of exposed sin. His wife Sarah sat beside him, her face cycling through confusion to comprehension to absolute devastation. She grabbed the program from her lap and began hitting Jake with it, over and over, the paper making pathetic slapping sounds while she sobbed. "You're sleeping with her? With Diane Morrison? She's old enough to be your mother. We have children, Jake. We have a family." Their kids started crying, confused and scared by their mother's breakdown. Sarah stood abruptly, grabbed her children's hands, and dragged her still frozen husband out of his seat. "We're leaving. Now." Jake finally found his voice. "Sarah, wait. Let me explain." But Sarah was done waiting, done listening, done being the good Christian wife who forgave everything. They stumbled up the aisle, Sarah pulling Jake by his shirt collar while their children cried and everyone watched. Reverend Matthews stood at the altar looking like someone had struck him physically. He had presided over this church for 20 years, had trusted his leaders, had believed in the sanctity of his community. To discover that 2 of his most visible members were having an affair, to have it exposed in this devastating public way, clearly shattered something in him. "Diane, Jake, you are both removed from all leadership positions effective immediately," he said, his voice shaking but firm. "This behavior is antithetical to everything we believe and teach. You need to leave. Now." Diane opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. She was ruined, socially destroyed in the community that had defined her identity. She looked around at the remaining guests, at faces that had once smiled at her, now turned away in judgment, and something in her collapsed. She fled, heels clicking on the limestone floor, disappearing into the parking lot. The ceremony continued, surreal and beautiful, with maybe 60 guests remaining out of the original 150. Those who stayed were mostly Caleb's friends, my friends, people who understood what had just happened, and why. Reverend Matthews, recovering his composure, looked at us with something like respect. "Do you still want to proceed?" he asked gently. Caleb and I looked at each other, then at the chaos we had created, then back at each other. "Absolutely," I said. We spoke our vows with voices steady and sure, promising love and truth and partnership in front of witnesses who would never forget this day. When Reverend Matthews pronounced us husband and wife, when Caleb kissed me in my neon green dress with silver stars, the remaining guests erupted in applause and cheers. We walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, and I felt lighter than I had in months. The reception was intimate and perfect. The guests who remained committed to celebrating rather than gossiping. We danced under string lights, ate incredible food, laughed until we cried, and turned what could have been a disaster into something triumphant. My friend Mason approached me near midnight, grinning. "That was the most insane thing I've ever been part of," he said, "but also maybe the most justified." I hugged him, grateful for his help in orchestrating the impossible. The photos that night were stunning, my neon green dress glowing in every shot, my joy visible and undeniable. When we posted them to social media, they went viral within hours. 30,000 people saw me in that dress, saw the caption I wrote, "Marriage is about authenticity and truth. Thank you to everyone who supported us. And to hypocrites everywhere, may you find peace in your lies. Neon bride forever. Authenticity wins. Subscribe to see how justice transforms into joy." The aftermath unfolded exactly as it needed to. Diane Morrison was excommunicated from First Baptist Church of Waco, her name removed from all leadership positions, her reputation in the conservative community she had built her identity around, completely destroyed. Women who had once sought her counsel now crossed the street to avoid her. The prayer group she led disbanded. Thomas filed for divorce within 2 weeks, a man who had spent 35 years being faithful, suddenly finding the strength to demand better. He got the house, most of their assets, and full support from everyone who knew them. Diane moved to a small apartment on the outskirts of town, working at a grocery store because her church connections had evaporated. At 60 years old, she was starting over in the wreckage of her own hypocrisy. Jake Sullivan lost everything too, as he deserved. Sarah divorced him, got primary custody of their children, and received child support that kept her comfortable while Jake struggled. He lost his worship leader position, his reputation, his church family. He tried to start a Christian music career independently, posting covers on YouTube, but the comments were brutal. "Isn't this the guy who slept with a church elder's wife? Preaching purity and living filth." He disappeared from social media within 6 months. Last I heard, he was selling insurance in Amarillo, as far from Waco as he could get while staying in Texas. His tattoos, once symbols of cool worship leader aesthetic, now just marked him as the hypocrite who fell. Some falls you do not recover from. Caleb cut off contact with his mother for 2 years, needing space to process the betrayal and grief of losing the parent he thought he knew. We moved to Portland, Oregon, bought a small house in a neighborhood full of artists and creators, built a life far from Texas drama. Caleb thrived in the Pacific Northwest tech scene, and I started my business designing non-traditional wedding materials for couples who wanted something authentic. Within a year, Riley Harper Designs was making $500,000 annually, featured in bridal magazines, booked solid with clients who were done with boring traditions. My neon green wedding dress became my brand, the story of exposing hypocrisy resonating with thousands of people who had been judged unfairly by self-righteous gatekeepers. I wore green in almost every photo shoot now, a reminder and a promise. Caleb eventually reconnected with his mother on a limited basis, supervised phone calls and occasional emails, but the relationship would never be what it was. How could it be? She had spent his entire childhood teaching him about morality and virtue while living a lie, and then she had tried to destroy the woman he loved for not conforming to her fraudulent standards. Some wounds heal, but leave permanent scars. Thomas, on the other hand, became a regular part of our lives. He visited Portland twice a year, took us to dinner, talked about his new life with relief and something like happiness. He was dating a kind widow from his accounting firm, taking salsa dancing classes, living more authentically at 62 than he had at 30. "Your wedding was the worst and best day of my life," he told me once over wine. "It destroyed my illusions, but set me free." On our second anniversary, Caleb and I returned to Fredericksburg and took photos at the Hoffman House. I wore a green dress again, not quite neon, but close, a tribute to the moment that changed everything. We stood where we had stood on our wedding day and laughed about the chaos, the scandal, the absolute insanity of exposing someone's affair during your own ceremony. "Do you regret it?" Caleb asked, his arm around my waist. I thought about it honestly, about the pain we caused, the lives disrupted, the brutal public nature of the revelation. Then I thought about Diane calling me sinful, trying to erase my identity, weaponizing religion to make me small. I thought about all the women who messaged me saying my story gave them courage to leave judgmental churches or demand better from hypocritical family members. "No," I said firmly. She declared war on my authenticity. I just won. Some battles are worth fighting, especially when you fight them in neon green. I am Riley Morrison now, married to a man who chose love over tradition, building an empire on the foundation of being unapologetically myself. Diane is alone in her apartment, aging and forgotten, the architect of her own destruction. And me? I am free, successful, radiantly happy, wearing the colors I choose and living by my own truth. Hypocrisy will always exist. People will always judge, but the ones who dare to shine their light on hidden sins, who refuse to be diminished by false piety, those are the ones who inherit the earth. I wore green at my wedding. I showed her sin, and I would do it again in a heartbeat, just to watch pretense shatter and truth emerge victorious from the wreckage. Truth always wins, always.